off right here to say welcome to everyone that's coming in. I see people keep coming in as we're going. I'm real excited to be here tonight. We were hoping to have a couple more of our staff members, but we're still actually working on the budget. We have to publish tomorrow. So a couple of them had to step out. We have both the chat and the Q&A enabled. So as we're going through just explaining some of the pieces, we're going to be monitoring those and we'll stop and ask the questions right then. I want to pass it though to Trustee Reckler and to Shakira Reynolds to just kind of talk about how we even got this started and where we hope to go in the future before we even begin. So I'm going to stop talking and hand it to you, Trustee, just to set the stage for what we're trying to do here.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you to the whole business services team, and thank you to everybody who's attending. You're part of our beta tonight, so you're a test, and you don't even know it yet. But what we are doing tonight, first, I want to welcome you, and I want you to know that school finance is what motivated me to get involved in schools, and actually what ended me up here on the board, which is that I had absolutely no idea how California schools were funded. I grew up in New York, very, very modest school, nothing fancy, and we had resources. I could see and feel the difference the moment I put my own child into kindergarten, and that's what started me on the road in school advocacy. School funding is extremely complicated. It is something that all of us should have a basic understanding of. You don't have to be a Dr. Wold, but if you have a basic understanding of how things work, I think it will really help in your path forward as parents, teachers, students, whatever your connection is to the WCCUSD. And my hope is that it helps you to understand where we are now, challenges that we have. Going forward, I do intend to bring forward a full-fledged budget university of a number of classes taking different parts of the budget cycle, school finance, and look forward to working on that over the summer. It's been a long time overdue, but we've been really busy and I really have not had a chance to work on it. But maybe over the slow time in the summer, we can take the feedback from this session and we can turn it into the modules going forward. So thank you. Very interested in your feedback. Hope you get something out of it. And that's it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I am Shakira Reynolds, and I am the chair of the DLCAPS committee. And I'm also a member of the Parent Leadership Council, which is the executive board's officers from the 4 parent advisory committees in the district. And really, tonight came out of our desire to have parents and community understand more about the way school finance works, the budget as we prepare for a new budget that's going to be presented to the board next week, really understanding what it is that comes to us so that we can really be, we can participate more. At the end of the day, in order for us to really have a voice and fully participate in the process of giving valuable feedback to our school district, we need the education in order to do that. And so that was really where our request as parents came from, is we definitely have the interest and the desire, but we needed more of the education. And so we really hope that this is one of many to help break this down for the community in a way that is more easily understood, and that for folks in layman's terms that are not a mathematician, but we all as a community deserve this information and need to be able to understand it. And so that's what we're hoping comes out of tonight, and that this is just the beginning. So welcome. And I hope that, at the end part of this, we will be asking what you got out of it, what else you would like to know, so that we can continue this type of interaction. So thank you. And Tony, back to you.
And thank you all. In a moment, I'm going to put up the presentation, and we've broken it into 4 parts. We're going to start right at the beginning with how budgets are actually coded. Regina Weber, our Director of Business Services, is going to present that until she's called away to finish up the actual budget, and then I may take over. We're then going to talk about the actual funding there, that how we used our one-time dollars so far. We are monitoring the chat, so we will be talking about the one-time dollars. And if UTR would like to be involved, they're more than welcome. This is an open forum today as we go forward. This is not about the budget cycle. It's about how to read the budget and look for the information tonight, but we're completely open as we go. So with that, what I'm going to do is bring up the presentation that we have. I believe we posted it. If we didn't, Veronica will be posting it, so it's available to everyone. And let me turn it into a slideshow there. At this point, I may not see all of the chats, so Veronica and team will kind of let us know what's going on. We are recording, we are here to listen. And so our agenda is reading the budget, so understanding the codes, how we do site allocations, because that's a big question. How does a site get X dollars? CARES and COVID funding, how much did the district receive and what was it used on? And then a little bit of the beginning of answering of the question, where does the money go? This is the first in a series. So with that, I'm going to just jump right in. There's a whole team that works on this. Many of them are here tonight. Many are still actually working on the budget that we'll be publishing tomorrow. But I want to thank not only Shakira and Leslie that are here, but we've actually stolen some stuff from public advocates and put it in here. And Marin has put together an exit survey, and Martine Blake from Community Engagement have been great assets towards working together. And our goal is to do a better job to bring the information to the community. So the budget calendar, real quickly, there are several formal reports to the board. It starts by June 30th, we have to adopt the budget. In September of this last year, we do what's called the unaudited actuals. That is the single time that our information is accurate, where it's 100% what happened. After that, everything's a combination of what's happened so far and what we believe is going to happen. And so that's a very important report to understand the accountability of what happens in school districts. On December 9th, we did the first interim and the parent LCAP there. On the 10th of March, it was our second interim. May, if we had been qualified, which we're not, would have been the third interim. And then a public hearing on the budget would have been the last piece there. There are 3 different certifications for a budget. The one that you want is positive. That means that the district has sufficient funds to meet its goals for the current year and the next 2 years. And the other thing we're going to try to do is, if there's acronyms in the middle of a slide, we're going to try to stop and tell you what that acronym means. Please remind us if we don't. They're all in the back of the presentation as well, but we want to slow down to do that. So positive means that the district can meet its goals for 2 years. Qualified means that the district may not be able to meet their goals either in the current or one of the 2 subsequent years. The red is negative. That means without a doubt, the district is unable to meet its financial obligations. If that occurs, you end up having an outside agency come in and take control of the district. Our district was qualified due to a structural deficit from December 2019 through March. In March, we were able to move to positive, partially due to the ability of utilizing one-time funds to support operations for the next 2 years. While there was a recent FCMAT report talking about our high risk for fiscal insolvency, that's only if we spend significantly over. There are one-time resources to provide supports to students. We plan to use those resources for students, and we'll talk more about that later. So with that, I can get this to move forward, sorry. There we go. This is a timeline of the key events. And we modified this from Public Advocates, so I want to make sure that we give credit to the actual chart. In June, which we're in now, the district will adopt its budget based on the state's projections. We have to hold a public hearing, which will be next Wednesday night, where the public can provide input on areas of concern for the budget, questions about the budget, as well as the LCAP, which is the Local Control Accountability Plan. Both of those public hearings will occur at the next board meeting. In September, we'll have the unaudited actuals, where we'll give a final report for everything that was done for that year. Carryover will be finalized and redistributed back to programs. December is the first look at how spending is going for that school year. It's also to make sure that our expenditures, meaning what we're paying for, is aligned to the priorities that have been set. In January, the cycle starts over. The governor, the second week of January, produces what is called his budget proposal, or her, depending on who's in office, and that starts the cycle. The entire spring, the district will do outreach to families and communities, all our stakeholders, to start looking at the priorities that we want to fund with those dollars. At the second interim, we're finishing up all of our input, making sure that the funding is aligned to the programs and services we want, which then gets finalized the second week of May. The governor releases a revision to how the state's economic situation is, and then we try to finalize our budget. And so quite a bit of that's been happening in the last week, with the legislature just yesterday coming to an agreement on what their priorities are. And now they got to get the governor to sign off. With that, we're going to take a step back. I'm going to quickly look at the chat and see if there's anything in there that I missed. So as it pertains to the FCMAT report and the 91 million, we're going to talk about that in the back half of this. So I'm going to wait to respond to those pieces there, but we will not be talking about anything that relates to collective bargaining. What we will talk about is what we've received and what it's been used for, because we want to honor that process as well. I think that is caught up. So with that, Regina, I'm going to hand it to you, and you just tell me next slides.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Good evening, everyone. So we're going to talk about the chart of accounts, and there are several different labels for that. Budget account, SACS code. It's basically the account string, and a lot of folks that work for our district know what we're talking about, but I do know that a lot of parents and community members don't know what we're talking about a lot of the times, and it's the segment of numbers that are tied to everything that we do in our district. It's tied to a salary, it's tied to a purchase order, it's tied to everything, because there is money tied to everything that we do. Being a public agency, we are managed by public funds. And so there are a set of accounts, which is here, our chart of accounts. And we are a local educational agency. We call it our district. These numbers, accounts as we call them, or SACS codes, are bases, and we use them recording for every transaction that we do. So every salary account, every order for every book, pencil that we place an order for. And it's very complex, and we try to simplify it. And as Ms. Reynolds mentioned, for every parent, trying to explain it sometimes is a little bit difficult. In the past, I've been in this district for 6 years, and we have had Parent University working. I've done some of these trainings with Marin Trujillo in Parent University, going to some of the sites. It's not always easy to try to get through to all community members and stakeholders, because everyone learns differently and is at different levels, but trying to keep it simplified as much as possible. Understanding what that structure is for the account codes is what's going to be critical, because it does tell a story. And so breaking it down is probably the best way to do so. So next slide, Tony.
And we will be pasting into the chat the PowerPoint to everyone. So Veronica will be pasting the link in a moment.
Perfect. And so here's the anatomy of what count code looks like. You have different segments, and they have different amount of numbers. Each segment, they range from 2 to 4 numbers and even 6 numbers in some of these segments. But again, each one tells a story. And so what a lot of folks are familiar with is the fund. And this is where a lot of folks get confused. So our most familiar fund is Fund 01, which we call the general fund. That is our largest source of revenue, largest fund, Fund 01 being general fund. We also have other funds, and we have a slide for that in the next couple of slides of what the fund is. We have Fund 11, 12, each one of those funds we have, represent a different fund. Adult ed, child nutrition, the bond fund, they're all separate. So they're different pots of money, and they all represent different restrictions on what you can use those funds for. And then you have the next segment here, and I just want to kind of take my time and go through these segments so you understand, and then we'll go through them again individually in the next few slides, is the resource. And we're going to take a little extra time on the resource in the next couple of slides as well, because these kind of roll up, and you'll see here in the purple slots, it says 000 is general fund. That's where people get kind of tripped up as well. It's really an unrestricted area where these funds come in from the state government, and it's an unrestricted general
Which
fund.
means flexible. So in the terms that parents would understand in the community, unrestricted means we have no rules that we have to follow within that.
Well, there are some rules.
Well, yes, well, there are. You can't just give it away.
Right.
But it's very flexible, whereas restricted means you have to follow a very specific purpose.
Correct.
Not to interrupt.
Yep. And then within those resources, there are several others. So there are other unrestricted resources within there, and we'll get into that later. And then it goes all the way up through 9999. So we'll go there. And then there's object code. And you'll see the blue box below. There are several different ranges of object codes. The 1000s through 1999 are certificated, salaries only, classified, and we'll get deeper into that. The next segment in green is site code. Those are going to represent each site for each school site, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, even departments. So educational services, food services, central office departments, so on and so forth. And then there's a goal, a function, manager code. And again, we'll go through each one of these. And at the very end, there is program code. These are, most of these segments are state specific, where we cannot go through and just make these up. They are state specific that we have to follow the California Department of Education. There's an actual book, the CSAM book. It's a
California School Accounting Manual.
Correct.
Remember, we're going to stop on acronyms.
We are. I was going to go there. And I think at the end there might be, well, yeah, at the end there's the acronym list. And so for some of these, we are able, they are district specific or LEA specific, and program code is one of those where we can drill down a little bit more and create a better detailed program code, so we can, it's a unique identifier, and we've done so, and we'll go through some of those, because I know with the DL cap and some of the other committees we have, you're familiar with some of those DL caps where we can identify what those programs actually do and how they function. Next slide, please.
There we go.
And
If you're
so what,
colorblind, this is horrible.
I know it's very bright. Sorry for blinding everybody's eyes here. So this is the same anatomy, what we just saw here, but it gives you a better description of what each of those fields mean. So as we were going through the anatomy of each segment, this kind of ties in, giving you a description, giving you the story behind what the fund is, the fiscal accounting of what each fund represents, what the resource code means, if it's a state resource, if it's a federal restricted resource. There is also a state restricted resource code range. And again, I mentioned we would go through that more specifically. I think that's really critical for everyone to know because there's the state unrestricted batch of numbers, and then there's the federal restricted, and then there's the state restricted. So there's actually three different sections. And this is exactly how I train staff in the business office. Once they understand those three sections, it helps them do their jobs much better when they're reading budget reports, when they're reading the financial summaries, when they're reading these unaudited reports. Can't see it, but it's there. Hopefully you can see it. We have them all posted on our website. And then we went through, I won't go through all of these here again, but the site identifies the school site or the office. And for those folks that don't know, or if you've ran, I know all of the principals and the office managers and secretaries have the opportunity to each and every year get Munis training, that's our financial system, to learn how to run these reports in our financial system, how to run their own site budget reports, as a matter of fact. Each site, all the elementary schools are in the range of 100 sites. All the middle schools are in the range of 200 sites, and all the secondary high schools are in the range of 300 sites. So that's just, these are just tidbits and tips and tricks that again, when I'm training folks, it helps. And then again, the goal defines the objective, what group of students and who's receiving the services. So if it's regular instruction, if it's alternative ed, if it's special education, these are state codes that are given to us that we have to put in. We cannot make them up, and they have to be used. The function describes the activities and the services that are actually being performed. If it's counseling, if it's basic instruction, if it's psychological services, whatnot, there's specific function code that we have to put in there. And there's different combinations that we can't use a specific function and goal combination or a specific object combination. It's very specific. So there's all these rules and regulations that the state has put for us, and it gets icky. So again, we have to go by this CSAM, this California School Accounting Manual, that really puts, I don't want to call it a damper, but we have to follow those rules very specifically.
So the real flexibility we have is that last one in yellow. That's the program one. Now, the one challenge, and this is something I'm going to kind of throw back to DLCAP, MDAC, and some of our other groups. There's a desire for us to bring the whole budget into reports, and we have that same desire. There's only one major limitation. Every account string can only be coded to one program. So if you have a teacher that works in 3 different things, they tend to get coded to generic instruction. But if you have a specific expense for a very specific program, we can create new program codes to be able to track very specific things, because I know that's been a desire of the community. So please, as we get more into program, that's an area that we have the ability to start tracking more to make data more accountable. The challenge is if somebody does work in multiple areas, that's where we get limited in our ability to go forward. But we wanted that to be a real focus in today's piece.
So here's that combination that I was talking about, and I put the link there, that it's very specific in how we have to form a valid account code. So if we just try to create a new account code string based on what we want to do, we can't just do whatever we want. It's got to be a valid account code. The system will kick out and it won't take it. It has to be by these combination codes, a specific function, object, or fund by goal. It's all in this CDE, this link here.
California Department of Education.
Correct. And in the California School Accounting Manual. Next slide. And so here we are as we're going through those segments again, I keep going back to the segments. This is the very first segment that we were discussing, the fund. As we work in finance, these become, we just know them by heart. The fund, the resource, the object, the site, the goal, the function, the project year, the manager code, the project year, and the program. I mean, literally, it's like the back of our hand. We know them by heart. And then you start to memorize even the numbers. It's kind of comical, actually. So again, back to the fund, you can see here, general fund being, these are some of the examples and the most commonly used funds that we've put here. Fund 01 being the general fund, Fund 11, adult education, Fund 13, cafeteria fund, Fund 21, the building fund. All of these other funds are not as commonly used, or probably aren't funds that folks aren't normally used to seeing, because general fund is our largest fund that we are in and looking at in our interim reports. Next slide.
Last night, we spent all night talking about Fund 21 and Fund 51, the
Yes, we
Bond
did.
Interest and Redemption Fund. And so that was the entirety of last night's meeting, which has absolutely nothing to do with general fund or instruction. So there are times where it is very appropriate to understand that the funds have different purposes.
Actually, that's very true, because with these other funds, that's a very good point, Tony. There is no crossing over. And this is something that I've had to train new staff or new principals when they're wanting to do a budget transfer, or they're saying, or, you know, even stakeholders, when I've gone to do different presentations at school sites. If we have all of this money in Fund 21, why can't we move it if we're deficit spending in Fund 01? Well, by law, we can't move money from one fund to another. It's just not allowed.
Yeah.
So
With very specific exceptions. For example, Fund 17 is actually our reserves. So those monies can come back to the general fund. But if we took bond money and paid for administrators, we would have violated what we told the voters
correct.
to do. And probably one of the more restricted funds where we have very little ability to move is, as funny as it sounds, the cafeteria fund. You would think, well, you can buy it. We can use the cafeteria fund only for things that are directly related to the cafeteria. So, hey, you have money in there. Can you build a cafeteria? No, we have to use Fund 1 or Fund 21 for that cafeteria because it's now an enhancement on the property. So it's one of those odd things that when you look at each fund, they have very specific rules as it goes forward.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. So here in the resources, we'll spend a little bit more time. I think it's really, really important to understand. And this is where a lot of my fiscal team work in making sure expenditure reports are being reported accurately, and we're reconciling a lot of the programs. There are actual reporting back to the state and federal government. That is a requirement because a lot of the funds that do come in require a lot of reporting, a ton of reporting. And so if you recall at the beginning when I started speaking, I mentioned there are 3 separate sections of monies. There's the unrestricted resources, which is state unrestricted, and that's the 0000, what Tony is circling, the 0670 and the 1400. That range there is the unrestricted general fund, considered state unrestricted funds. That's going to be an area that you would be able to identify fairly quickly in our financial reporting. And if I go to our booklet, I'm just looking at one of our interim reports. It's in our revenues considered the LCFF sources, 8010s to 8099s. That's that range of unrestricted resources. And sliding across, instead of down, go across. The next section is the federal restricted resources, 3000s to 5999s. That's where you're going to have your most restricted. That's where Title I, Resource 3010, special education, the most restricted, federal restricted resources live. And it's all those ranges that roll up. That in the financial interim reports is in revenues, your 8100s to 8299 object codes, but it clearly is identified as federal revenue.
And so we're going to paste into the chat a link to our website where all of our budget reports are kept. So when Regina was holding up a book, we have the last 10 years worth of those books all in one spot. So Veronica will be pasting that into the chat, just like we pasted in the presentation. She'll also repaste the presentation a couple times for people that came in afterwards. Sorry to interrupt, keep going.
And then the third one is what I had mentioned, the state restricted resources, 6000s to 7999s. These are also state revenue, just like the first section, but they're not unrestricted, they're restricted. And so there are some strings attached. There's some reporting attached. It's not as flexible as Tony mentioned, like the unrestricted. There's definitely expenditure reports and other things that are required. And you can see those resource codes there. And so everything that we live and breathe in the business office is tied to these resource codes. Also the object codes, but more importantly, these resource codes. And you cannot overlap. You cannot go from one resource code to another. These funds have to remain within these resource codes. You cannot transfer funds from one resource code to another. That is like just the biggest no-no. And that's probably the biggest struggle, because when we're, one account is low and another account, then you just cannot transfer it. It's got to remain within these resource codes no matter
And
what.
that becomes the challenge when people don't understand, when we say, well, we can't fund that program. And they go, but you have money over here. Why can't you just move it over? And the way it's provided to the district requires us to do certain things. So
Correct.
That's why we're taking so long on the codes, because it ultimately is the answer to a lot of the why do you do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. The last column is the local resources restricted. Those are 8000s to 9999. Those roll up, well, they don't roll up, it is the fourth column, local revenue. So those are going to be all donation accounts, local grants, local, we also have our site LCAP there, 9670 at the bottom, that we created because when LCAP was first created, we had to track it somehow, and we put it in 9670. So anything that is locally defined is going to be here in the local resources restricted. Ongoing major maintenance, all these different special account numbers are all in the 9,000, 8,000 and 9,000 ranges. And so that's how these will always be coded. That's how you'll be able to read in the financial interim reports, going all the way back to as long as we have them posted. That's how they roll up in our interim reports. Of course, as you drill down, you'll see different resource codes, as I mentioned here, and then drilling down further. But each segment is critically important, and knowing what the restrictions are for each is equally important. And that's how I make sure as staff gets trained, they know what those restrictions are. Next slide. Any questions on that? I don't know.
I've been watching the chat, so
Okay.
if something comes up, I kind of jump in. Shakira, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to tell folks they can also use the Q&A. There was a question in the Q&A that said, could you please provide an example of what you mean when you say someone is working in multiple areas that makes it harder to code? And it says, for example, a teacher who worked in the health academy and the after school program would be in only one or the other, or perhaps just instruction. So when you use the Q&A, it's easier for your question to be raised and answered in that space, and then we can always come back to it and read the questions and the answers a little easier than putting it into the chat function.
Sure.
And that was a great question.
Yep. It definitely was. If I heard you right, the CPA Academy is a 6385 resource code. And after school, there's two. There's a 7220 resource code, and there's another, I think it's 6, I don't remember what the other resource code is. So they would be either, I mean, it could be split, a 50-50, 70-20, you know, it could be 70-30, it could be a different split, but it
Right,
would
and that's
be,
why I answered the way I did, because
it could vary.
Yep.
Okay. 60-10. Thank you, Maria. That's correct. Object code. So here we get into the type of expenditures, which is also extremely important because it lets us know what type of expenditures, how to code things, and this is not on the revenue side, but on the expenditures. So knowing how to read the codes tells you what type of expenditure it is, and it all obviously can be drilled down further, but there is a segment and a range of what those are, and they also roll up state specific. So all 1000s, for instance, are certificated salaries. And you'll see here in this first section, we have 1110 being regular teacher salary, but a 1120 is extra temporary, extra hourly. It's extra time basically for a teacher. And 1130 is substitute teacher. It's still all in the range of certificated salaries. So it's still teacher salary, but it breaks it down by either substitute, extra time, supervisory, or other certificated. So it's just it's basically drilling down further, right, for certificated salaries.
And we should say these are not all of the codes. There's a lot more.
No, there's more.
But this was so much information. We tried to put some examples.
The most common. Yeah. Yep. Next to that are the 2000 codes, object codes, and those are classified personnel salaries. And so that's going to be, again, there, like Tony said, there are more, but all, and when we put the X's because it's 21, there's 2110s, 2120s, 2130s, there's so many, but those are classified instructional. So any paraprofessionals or tutors, whatnot, are going to be in the 2100 range. Classified support will be in the 2200 range. Classified supervisor and administrative, again, all classified personnel always begin in the 2200, or I'm sorry, in the 2000 ranges. And so that can never be, that's just, again, from that California School Accounting Manual, all classified personnel begin in the 2000 ranges. This is the unique identifier. and
Well,
all
one of the
1,000
questions,
Yep.
one of the questions that gets asked a lot is, do you have too many administrators? Or how much are you spending on administrators? So I'll pick on us for just a second.
Okay,
And if you want to know in our reports, all you have to do is look at whether in the certificated 1310 is your administrator's salaries. In the classified, it's 23, I think it's 2310. We just put the XX instead of the 10 in that case. So if
Right.
you're looking to find out what are paid for administrators, you can specifically go to those categories and see that compared to what is a regular teacher, what is that instructional aid, so you can see exactly how the district's budget is distributed.
exactly.
All right.
And then the next section are the 3,000s, and that's employee benefits. This rolls up all 3,000 for certificate and together combined. What you will see though is STRS, PERS, and for those folks that are not familiar, the STRS is obviously written out here. The acronym is STRS, but it's State Teachers Retirement System. So the STRS 3101 would tie back to the certificated personnel salaries, whereas the 3201 PERS would tie back to the classified the classified personnel salaries. But all of the rest of those 3,000s here, the SDI, health and welfare, unemployment, workers' comp, all of those are combined certificated and classified. We call them fixed costs or fringe. These have to be paid, obviously, and so this is based on employer costs and are budgeted within these employee benefit 3,000 object codes.
And as we build this series of presentations, we'll actually bring in one of the books and have you look and ask questions like, how much do you think we spent on health and welfare? And have you actually be able to see that right on the page and go, okay, now I know. I can compare. Because many times they go, how much do you pay on consultants? Well, there's actually a line for that. And you can go look at it and go, okay, now I know.
Yep. I'm going to go down to the bottom left corner of materials and supplies, 4,000s. That is our range, 4,000 object codes. Just what it says, materials and supplies. It's going to be everything from textbooks, core curriculum materials, food purchases, tech materials, non-capitalized equipment and technology, everything tangible or non-tangible, actually, because it could be subscriptions, or it can be anything that, what am I trying to say? Not subscriptions, but what have we been doing? All the technology that we've been doing for hybrid learning can be in here
You'll
as
see
well.
software in one spot.
Software, thank you.
One of the big things here to look at, all students have a Chromebook.
Yep.
That's 4,360. If you have a laptop, it's 4,400. And non-capitalized means we don't have to put it inside our fixed asset inventory. An asset is something that has value. They're capitalized means that we have to keep it in our inventory for valuation purposes. And that's why there's a different code. So because of the fact that we are a one-to-one Chromebook, the 4,360 and the 4,100 are our instructional materials. Every
Right.
student needs both.
The
Access to a
4,400s
textbook.
do, the 44s do get tagged with the fixed asset tag though, to track.
Yes, they do get tagged with it, but it's a different category
Correct.
of how we have to account for it there. And so it gets confusing to even those that work in the system. But once you start to get this, you understand. Yes, Shakira.
There was a question in the chat from, are there any funds that can be moved? And there was a second question around local parcel taxes. Are they available to the entire district or only the local city schools? And the answer to that question is Parcel tax is distributed to both the district and charter schools based on enrollment of each site. So charters receive 2 million and the district receives 7 million. But if one of you could please answer, are there funds that can be moved around?
So there are a couple that can move around. For example, Fund 17 can be brought to the general fund. We can send general fund over to Fund 12, Child Development, to Fund 13. If we did not have enough money to support nutrition services, general fund can be sent the other way, but very little can ever come back to Fund 1. So it's easier to move Fund 1 to a restricted fund than the other way around. The only money that we can bring into Fund 1 is money that is sitting in Fund 17, which is our designated reserve. And when we do that, that means we have less money in our savings account. The other place where you could see money come to the general fund is from Fund 71. That's our retirement fund. But if that money was brought over, it can only be used to pay for retirement benefits. So hopefully that helped answer that. It's a one-way move. So with that, let's kind of jump ahead to the next slide because I do want to get to the one-time funds tonight too. So here we go. This one should be easy.
Yeah, we kind of went through this already. As I mentioned, sites all are in the 100 site codes. So every elementary school are going to be in the 100, all the middle school and junior highs, 2s. All the high schools are in the 300s. I didn't mention adult education. At one point we had 2 sites. We have one now, is in the 400 range. All the charter schools, because we do have to have them with a site code, because we do pay them, are in the 500s. And then all the departments, central administrative operations and maintenance, are in the 600 ranges. So if you ever see those budget codes that I mentioned with any of the site code numbers here that start in any of these areas, you'll know what department or what section they're from by the site code number that they start with. And then the 700s are non-public schools. And then the goal, as we mentioned, these are some of the examples of what those goals are. Obviously, the most common is the 1110 regular education. That's what we use the most of, but there are others that we do have to use when we're putting together a budget code and creating a whole SACS line. But 1110 is the most common.
So there's one in here that I just wanted to single out. I don't know if many people know. 1160 is there because we actually do have a radio station. And one of my goals is to actually make that more accessible to our students to potentially be involved in real, actual radio. So right now we have one teacher that helps focus and program that, but WCCUSD does have a legitimate operational radio station. Sorry, just had to jump that one out as we go.
Absolutely, and that's how we track it so we can budget for it properly. Yep. And then here are some of the commonly, here's the actual ranges of function codes, giving you the activities, which is really important to know what those codes mean. Again, the function is an important combination code, 1000 being instruction. If you see a 1110, special education, and then obviously some of the instruction related services, 2495 being parent participation, or if it's a 2700 school administration, which would be like front office and that sort of thing. Next slide.
Sorry about that. There you go.
And then here we have the manager code, which was that longest one, a 6-digit code. And so this is the cabinet division. Everything rolls up to cabinet level. So all of what we've tried to do is all of those other budget codes that we have, they all roll up to a specific cabinet level. We have obviously the 100,000 is the superintendent. The 200,000 is district operations. That this also includes the sites. So when we get our revenue and we're budgeting for all of the staff, for instance, just all the basic stuff, the teachers and everything for one site, it's out of this manager code 200,000. It's not specifically, okay, school site, we're going to give you your budget and this is how many, and then you're going to have to figure out how many teachers you need. The budget's pretty much given to them, and then, you know, they have a different site budget that they're able to do whatever they need to do with. That's usually their site LCAP or their Title I, or what have you. But it's 200, 100, or 200,000 is from the district operations division here in the cabinet division. And then the 300,000 is educational services, manager code, and you can see the rest. 400,000 is facility maintenance bond, 600 is business services, so on and so forth. So they always tie back to one of the cabinet divisions and who's responsible for that section of accounts. Next slide. And then the project year, it's usually by default going to be 0, but we do have some grants that are multi-year. For instance, the partnership academies, they're typically a 2-year grant. And so we do have to use project year for many reasons. A lot of our lead teachers are fully aware of this. If any are on this now, they'll know that we go 2 years and they actually cross over, which gets really, really complex. And so we use the project year to make sure that we're not crossing those grants over and getting into any fiscal discrepancies. And so we'll use the project year for those crossing of fiscal years on project year. But most of the time it's just by default a project year 0.
Yeah. This used to be very important for the facilities department, where they're doing building projects that take 2 or 3 years to complete. We have a different software now called Colby that actually allows for them to do the entire project, whether it's a 1-year, 2-year, or 3-year cycle. And SACS that we're talking about now wasn't very effective for that. So that's why Colby was created. So this isn't that used, but it is available.
And then our last segment of our SACS code, our lengthy budget code, is program. And this, a lot of folks should be familiar with is, again, our locally defined, which has changed, and we've just created it, and it's kind of grown into something bigger and more feasible for our district. A lot of these are not all of them. Again, these are probably the most commonly used, but there are definitely more. But this helps us drill down further and be able to run specific year-to-date budget reports. It helps with managing a lot of the expenditures and helping with a lot of the program folks in getting what they need out of, you know, what's been spent or what's been budgeted or how to put the budget together. And so a lot of these codes, and they have evolved. So we've had some that are of no use anymore. And so some of the numbers from years and years ago have been recycled, but for the most part, these are all new valid numbers, and we use them quite a bit. And they're very, very important.
Regina, can you tell us what's the difference between 3180, which is practices for African-American students, and then 1180, which is African-American student support?
Those
I'll kind of jump in on that.
Yeah,
First.
LCAP.
So this is kind of challenging. There's actually 1180, 2180, and 3180, and they weren't titled perfectly. The first one is supposed to be 1180 direct student support. The 2180 is supposed to be professional development for those providing the support, and 3180 is supposed to be focused on the parents that provide the students that need to get the support. So the idea is to have focus areas on the staff that support, as well as the parents, as well as the direct students. And that's why it was designed that way when the LCAP was created for those. Great question though, because it took me about 3 or 4 months to quite understand what we were trying to do there.
Yeah. And I think we've changed, I mean, some of the descriptions we've changed. I don't know if it would be worthwhile to get those.
Not for tonight's, but
no, not for tonight,
Yeah,
in the future, moving forward, yes. And so some of the resource guides, again, where to find guidance, we mentioned CDE, the California Department of Education website, is my best friend, and our staff in the fiscal department, we constantly go there because there's a ton of information. It's not the most user-friendly website, I'll have to tell you, but that's where we go to get our expert advice. That's where we go to get our grant award information, any updates. Again, the California School Accounting Manual that we call the CSAM, that is our Bible. That's what gives us the valid account code structure, combination, validity. That gives us everything, you know, from what transfers are allowable, from what accounts, everything, what we can and cannot do, because again, we have to follow those regulations per CDE, per the California Department of Education. There's just so many regulations, and it's just, it cracks me up when they're like, oh, it's unrestricted, you can do what you want. Yeah, just kidding, not really. You have to follow these regulations. You know, you can't just do what you want. And so again, there's these links here, but it does update, not probably as often as it should, but right now the California School Accounting Manual is a 2019 version. And so if you go to the link on the California Department of Education website, it is downloadable. It is very thick, extremely thick. So you can download it. It's just a lot of reading. And that's why I've kind of plucked away and done my presentations and kind of did it and modified it to our district, because it's just easier to read, easier for us if it's modified to our district rather than just statewide. It's just so much information, but it is available for anybody there, you know, for anybody to go to and read. And that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank
You want to catch us up on
Regina.
the chat?
Yes.
Shakira?
So Tony, I wanted to call to your attention that actually only the panelists can see the questions that are coming up in the Q&A. So as you're answering them, at least that's my understanding. It says, so as you're answering, that's why I keep reading them. And when you see them, then you can go ahead and read them out loud and answer. First, thank you, Regina, for your very thorough presentation and this piece. It was a lot of information, but the slides were well organized. I know I can go back and look and have these other resources that are currently on the screen. One of the great, I don't know who the anonymous attendee is asking questions in the Q&A, but they have some great questions. It says, clearly budget codes are complex and time consuming. What kind of oversight currently exists to find mistakes that have been made? And since this coding is being used at individual school sites as well as the district level, it's reasonable to assume mistakes could be made at the site level also. So are there computer programs that do statistical analysis looking for inconsistencies? And Dr. Wold said we have staff that have to audit this as well as external auditors, and then compliance requirements for each of the resources to safeguard this. And then he went back and answered the question about parcel tax. It's not by city. We are a district with 5 cities. It is by the district. So all of the district benefits from the parcel tax amount that comes in, not just the ones within certain city limits. And I think, can someone in the chat just let us know if if everybody can see the Q&A. My understanding was only the host can, oh, well, Kim says she can see it. So perfect. The other question is, can you explain what is meant by finding grant information on the website? And it says the California Department of Education has information on every grant. So what kind of grants come to the school district? I always thought the funding was like guaranteed funding based on LCFF or something like that. So what kind of grants are the
So for example, at the last board meeting, we are going to be approving the early intervention block grant. It's something that we applied for very specific schools where they get dollars. So there are often application grants that the California Department of Education does. We also have individuals that get grants. The Scully grant goes to several schools. The Hewlett grant was a local grant that comes through. And so those have different rules. So there are a variety of different philanthropical grants that come through that get coded, as well as the Department of Education has competitive grants. Many of the proposals in the governor's budget this year may be application grants where we have to submit an application to receive those funds. Okay, I am going to move us forward, and we're going to talk briefly about how do sites get funded. And so I'll kind of take this one here, and it starts with, this is our formula, and it's built based on the Title I rules. And so there's a little explanation that's needed. We have the LCAP funding that goes to sites. The way that is done is we take the percentage of unduplicated count students. And what we mean by that is you take every student that receives free or reduced lunch that are considered socioeconomically disadvantaged, plus any students that are not receiving free and reduced lunch that are English learners. So they're in that category, plus any foster youth and any students classified as homeless. And homeless doesn't mean they don't have a place to live. You could be staying with your sister's family and you don't have your own home. That's considered homeless. When families are doubled up, there's a category for it. So if you're any one of the four, you could be more than one, but if you're any one of you, count for unduplicated count. And so we get the percentage by school there, and you can see the dollar amount for every student that meets that criteria that is provided for that school. For Title I, it is exclusively federal law based on free and reduced lunch count. So only if you have the free and reduced lunch. So every year we ask families to complete the lunch application. Even if they don't qualify, we want to get that information because one, it helps ensure that the school gets funded, but it also means that we can potentially get additional resources to that school to support all students. The general fund is for supplies. So classrooms, it's not a lot of money, but for every student in elementary school receives $22 that the principal and the teachers can work on to buy other supplemental pieces. And then for the office, such as paper and other things, it's at $7 for elementary and K-8 and $10. Now, one thing that frustrates folks is under the categorical, these are restricted dollars, the rules state that you must currently be over the age of 5 or not over the age of 18. So we can only give funding for students ages 5 through 17. That means that there is a significant number of 18-year-old students at high schools that we cannot fund for. Same thing with transitional kindergarten, and the state is now changing the law over the next 4 years that you will be able to enter at age 4. Currently, they have not changed the rules for funding. We'll probably start to change our LCAP rules to distribute more funds, but we cannot change our Title I. The last allocation that we provide is elementary yard duty. And the way that works out, for every 100 students, 1.5 hours is allocated to the school. And we round up to the highest 100. So if you have 120 students, we don't round down, we round up to 200. And that 120 student school would get 3 hours a day times the whole week to get. And we've determined that because it's very difficult to only have 3 hours, the minimum the school will get is 6 hours. So regardless of enrollment, we're giving you those 6 hours. So that's the allocation. Now you go, well, what does my school get? And I know there's questions, I'll try to get to those, or maybe Regina can answer the Q&A questions. So here is the data. And we had to break it down so that it could go through quite a few. And what I'm just going to go across there. CBEDS is the California longitudinal database. It's our educational system where we report our enrollment. So what you have is, what was the enrollment at Bayview in 2019? It was 479. What was the enrollment in 2020, the current year? 437. So the change was 42. What are we projecting Bayview is going to have for students this coming year? And in case anyone wasn't sure, we will be back full-time in-person instruction at all schools. And we're anticipating 470 smiling students walk onto the Bayview campus there. What was their free and reduced lunch count in 2019? 73%. In 2019-20, the unduplicated count was 84. So you can see how when you might have some English learners that aren't free and reduced, that increase that percentage. So those are different numbers, and that's important to recognize. And what were the percentages for this year? So free and reduced lunch went from 73 to 86. We spent a lot of time getting those applications in this year. The unduplicated count went from 84 to 89. So you can see the changes here, whether they went up or down. So you can see, for example, we had a very focused effort at Ford, and their free and reduced lunch count increased by 20%. So this is just through L. Now I'll move to the next slide. And I'll stay there for just a minute because some of these might be your schools. And as you look at those, you can see the changes for each of those all the way down to West County Mandarin there, which is pretty much around the same, hovering at 42%. You can see some of our larger schools like Montalban, 86% moved up to over 90% are in that criteria. So this turns into, secondaries next. For those that have older students, here's the percentages at our secondary schools. You can see the enrollment changes this year as we were in distance learning. Harbor Way is an alternative program. We did not have students there this year. That's why it has the 0 there. And this one down here are special education students that are either in homeschool or non-public school placements based on their disability. They're still our students. We're still responsible for them. They're just not assigned to one of our schools. You can take a look at some of our larger schools there. If you go and take a look at El Cerrito, very steady, 1569 to 1549. You can see the changes. I want to focus on big changes there. De Anza, very focused on getting free and reduced lunch applications. They moved all the way up to 76% free and reduced. You're going to see that that makes a big difference in just a minute when you do the data. So now we're into the money. And this is a lot of information on one slide. Couldn't figure out a better way to do it. So I'm just going to go kind of across. So again, we look at what was their LCAP allocation this year. What is their LCAP going to be next year? You'll see the change as we break down the percentages and tiers. What was their Title I this year? And that gets broken down into several sections. So Title I, you get your allocation, a small percentage must be used for professional development, and another percentage must be used for parent involvement. Combined, their Title I is 82,000. So you can see the change. The total change from this year to next year is listed here. If you go back to the previous slides, if you see a big drop or a big gain, it's almost entirely because of either a significant enrollment change or a significant change in the percentage of students that were coded either free and reduced or the unduplicated count. You had asked about grants. There are a couple there. The early literacy block grant is one we talked about. So several schools qualified for that. And you see those allocations right here. And then CSI is a grant that you didn't really want to receive. It's for schools that did not meet certain academic criteria in previous years. And so they're given additional support to try to improve and move those students beyond. So there is the first group of students. If I go to the next, and again, I'll stop for just a minute there so that folks can take a look at their school and go across. And this is all in the presentation. And great question there. I see, what is tier 4 and hold harmless? We had a couple schools that dropped below qualifying for any money. They were a Title I school this year, and their total free and reduced lunch count dropped where they would have gotten 0. We felt that that was too significant to have them go from whatever amount they had in one year to 0 the next year. So we put them in the lowest tier, held them harmless to get some funding this year. The hope is that we can obtain enough free and reduced lunch applications for next year to re-qualify them so that they never lose that ongoing funding and support. So that was the real reason why we had hold harmless. I'll go one more slide so that the secondary families can take a look at what their school site is getting.
Tony, I did, while this is on the screen, one of the questions was asked is the additional funding that comes in for the UPP, does it go, I thought the question was all to the sites. And so the answer was yes, but I feel like I don't believe they get all of the LCAP funds.
No,
some of it is district wide. And I wanted to clarify for folks so that people don't think we're giving different messages in DLCAPs. Homeless students are not part of the UPP at the state formula. They will be for the new LCAP, but for the previous one, they were not. The UPP is only English language learners, low income students, and foster youth. But for the purposes of the district, they also include African-American students and families in transition, and the new formula will officially include families in transition. So I just wanted to clarify those two things.
Thank you for that. And the first part I was going to clarify, the total dollars. When LCFF, Local Control Funding Formula, was created in 2013 by Governor Jerry Brown, his message was that it costs more to populations that have higher unduplicated count students. Again, as Shakira just said, English learners, foster youth, and free and reduced lunch. And they created a formula to provide more money for all students in that district to receive services because it costs more to create services just for all. They then added a concentration grant so that you would be able to provide focused instruction. I'll use an example of Verde. Verde, their UDP, unduplicated count, is 97%. It's basically every student. So when the district creates their staffing for Verde, LCAP funds and other things are sent as part of our normal focused staffing for that school. So the unduplicated count does not get every dollar because many of the services are district wide for all students because our total count is over 70%. What we do is we take a portion of the LCAP and give it back specifically to sites above and beyond those centralized supports. And that's how it was designed when we first did the LCAP. Once you set it up, it's very hard to just stop doing those services. So I hope that kind of clarifies it a little bit better. So with that, I'm going to kind of move to the next piece there. So this was the question of a lot of folks. There's been a lot of one-time funds that have come into the district. And so what were they and where did they go? So we're going to start with what were they? And this is a slide that we've used with the board a couple times. When the pandemic began in March of 2020, literally the same 2 weeks prior to us shutting down the school, we laid off 200 certificated employees. We brought to the board a resolution. There was not enough money for the district to be able to pay all of its bills. And so we formally fired, is the best way to say, laid off is the nicer way, 200 certificate employees. In April, just because of the timeline, we laid off another 150 classified employees. We immediately brought back many of those individuals. They were still there because the layoff wouldn't go into effect till July 1st. So for July 1st, when they wouldn't have had a job, we restored them by using CARES Act money. That meant that we're taking money that we didn't have when we made that decision to keep the position. To the public, it looks invisible because the person was there and then the next year they're still there. So it's just assumed that they're being paid with the same money they were before. But the district had to make cuts and then used one time, and I'm going to show you in charts exactly what we're talking about in a moment, to sustain things that we would have lost. Without those supports, we would not have been able to add additional technology, additional equipment. We would, if we had not received these CARES Act funds today, right now, we would be talking about more layoffs that we would have had to have done. And that's a much longer story about where we were at. But the CARES Act helped us keep quite a bit, and it's still coming in other things. So we're going to keep those same services for several years. So this just explains some of the things you can pay for with them. And so, for example, one of the things we're using one-time money for is our transportation contract. That's a big contract. And by using the one-time monies, we don't have to make cuts elsewhere. And we'll continue to use that for the next couple of years. When those one-time monies are gone, we will have to ensure that there's still money for that transportation contract. And if the state doesn't give us more funds, then we would have to make cuts elsewhere. So here is a chart of all of the money, $139 million. It's not all here today. Some of the money was received last year, some this year, some will not even come to us till next year or the year following. So what we've done is we've listed the titles of each of the funds that came. So you can see there's 7 or 8 of them. From the emergency and secondary school emergency relief, there's 3 different versions of that. You have 2 versions that were authorized under the Trump administration, and then a 3rd version that was just authorized under the Biden administration. We have not actually received any ESSER 2 or ESSER 3 yet. You then have a portion of CARES Act that was called the Governor's Emergency Relief Fund, or GEAR. You had the CARES Act that everyone heard of, that was the first act. We then had some Prop 98 funds that came to us. Prop 98 is the state's funding. We currently opened up for our intervention program this spring with the in-person instruction block grant. That money's being 100% spent by June for staff to have come back. And then we have for this summer the Extended Learning Opportunities Grant, the ELO grant there. You can see the dates when we must legally have spent every dollar. Some of those dates are already over or about to be over, such as May 31st, 2021. We had to have been spent by those dollars. You can see when was the last date the district would use those monies. So you can see in some cases, we spent this resource 7420, and Regina just spent a whole lot of time talking about resources. If we were in person, I might do a quiz and say, how many of you know, is that a state or a federal restricted resource? And Regina would say, of course, it's a state because it's a 7,000. Go back to the chart there. But
Tony,
that one was spent. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, so the March 13th, that's the date that the funds were available? That was one of the questions in the Q&A.
So
the
that's the date that, no, that was the date that we could charge expenditures. So for example, we didn't receive this CARES Act money until I think we received it in August, but we actually were able to go back and charge expenditures back to March. And so that's the timeline that you had from what you could actually use. And then this is when we spent it out, meaning it's going to be all gone. So to help kind of explain it, I'm going to go to the next slide to show you what we did last year. Last year, the books closed on June 30th. We had this much money that we had to spend. We had CARES Act, and we spent 6.2 million of it. So when I go back, you go, is that all of it? And you look at resource 3220. No, we received 23. But last year, we spent 6 million of it. And so you can kind of see how each piece went, and then when it's completely gone. We spent 1.6. And so what did we spend it on? ESSER 1, we actually had to cut the sites. So the LCAP that I just talked about was taken away from the sites due to our structural deficit, and we gave them instead ESSER 1 so that they didn't lose any funding. And so site positions that were funded by LCAP are now funded there. Extra help, you can see each of the different pieces there. Services and supplies, so the site service contract, software licenses. So there's 1.6 million. If we go to the next slide, we have the same description for CARES. We actually brought back and kept people. So people are going to instantly go, well, who's that? Is that Regina? That's the salary? And the answer is no. We do what's called journaling. We say, okay, we've got $1.46 million for staff. We are going to journal, which means in our chart of accounts, in our general ledger, we're going to make an entry that takes the salary of all teachers and brings over 1.4 million of it, so that we're saving that general fund there. So it's not a specific person. And whenever you take salary, there are required benefits that are attached to it. That's why the benefits are there. Then technology is pretty simple. We had to buy Chromebooks. We had to buy Zoom licenses. And then remember I said our transportation contract? So you can see that's how much of the transportation contract got paid. The same thing here, we journaled salary and then the benefits go with it. So it's not a specific person like, oh, this teacher is funded by that. We know that we had 150 teachers that were laid off. So the salary of 150 teachers can be journaled to these funds so that we don't have to keep them laid off.
So
that,
Tony, yeah. I'm sorry. I want to, there are some great questions in the Q&A, and as they're coming up and really relevant to where we are in the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Someone wanted to know if other school districts got the same monies. So
they got different amounts, but yes.
Okay. And then someone else brought up a great point, and I know it's going to come up and I just want you to keep it in mind as you keep going through the presentation, is aren't we just kicking the can down the road if we're using one-time funds to cancel plan cuts? And how will we deal with this in a few years? And I know I've heard you use the term not using these one-time funds to pay for things that breathe. And so I think people want to know, just what is the plan for that? Because we won't be getting CARES funding, in 3 years. And so I just want you to keep that in mind as you go through the presentation. And then there was also a question about efforts for free and reduced lunch forms, but I think we can come back to that at the end, or actually I can type in the answer to that because I feel like I know it.
Yeah. And so I will say this. Yes, we have been partially kicking the can down the road. Tomorrow, we'll be posting a copy of the budget, hopefully. It may be Saturday, depending on how things go. I'll be adding a PowerPoint that I'll be presenting. And in there, these slides are going to be there, but there's going to be another slide that's going to be added probably Tuesday or Wednesday, but it'll be presented on Wednesday night, where I'm actually going to show what has happened to the structural deficit. So that 49 million, I'm going to show exactly what changed and where we are today and how we're covering that, because that question is a terrific question. And this is to Mike Schneider. We're going to actually walk through at the board meeting on Wednesday night that exact question to the board so that they're able to have in that public session a conversation. That's the same night that the public gets to give input prior to bring the budget back, so that we'll be able to really transfer it. And you're going to see our plan in the next 7 slides as well, what we're doing for the next 2 years. But that's a great question. And part of it is that you'll see in Wednesday night's presentation that we actually covered and addressed most of the structural deficit. But if we don't start adding services back, we won't be able to meet the needs of our students. So we're taking a balanced approach. We are going to be adding things back next year that we believe are essential services, and that includes people, because we need more service, more positions there as we go. And I'm not talking about negotiations when I'm talking about this. I'm talking about kids needing services. So we'll go more in depth into that. So that is $10 million that was spent of the 139 last year. So let's go to right now. Here's what we did this year. If I can get my thing to go forward.
And one other question, Tony, I'm sorry, I told Mr. Johnson I would ask. He asked about transition education and how special education funding ties into the bigger picture of the funding sources we've shared thus far.
I love Eddie. I'm so glad to see you here tonight, Eddie. Transition is funded with special education service money. And in fact, we are focusing on trying to do even more. I know that Veronica's here had to run down to Bissell this afternoon because the transition funding grants had to be signed by me to submit to CDE. So it's a different funding source than one-time funds, but transition is an extremely important program that sometimes we forget to talk about, that we have students up to the age of 22 that we are trying to provide them with the life skills so that they can be contributing members of society beyond their time with us. And so we do put resources there. So this year, we used $46 million of the one-time funds. Some of it is to cover the exact same things we covered last year. And you'll start seeing those. Some of it, however, is for very specific purposes. This is one time. It came in 8.2 million. We would have gotten 9 million, but we opened on April 19th, not on April 1st. So some of the money will not be received from us. And this is paying for those staff members that supported us reopening in the partial way that we were able to do this spring. That money will not continue next year, nor will the expense. So it's one time it's gone. So you can really take that 46 down to 34 or 36 when you understand that. And then moving forward, you can see the rest of that CARES Act paid for salaries of folks that we wouldn't have necessarily been able to keep. Remember, 150 teachers is 15 million. So that is expense that we kept rather than cut when we did pieces. Extra help, PPE, that is personal protection equipment, masks, different ventilation devices, extra cleaning supplies. We spent out of this account almost $1 million. We bought a lot of Chromebooks, 2.4 million, and we got to keep buying more as they break. Again, I talked about first student. So there you can see the transportation contract right there, more software. Then you go into a different account. Here we use that for extra hours, more PPE, more technology, different contracts. These happen to be some of our technology contracts to start working on some data one time that we did in there, and additional software because Zoom licenses aren't cheap. There as we go. Here you can see additional site positions. Remember ESSER, we used at the site level. So these are all site expenses. And then because we had more site expenses, we will draw a little bit of ESSER too to finish up the year on sites. So that takes us up. And then summer, we're going to have 40 school sites open. We're spending $10 million out of the Extended Learning Opportunities Grant for summer. And part of the law required us to add hours to our paraprofessionals, including Eddie in transition there. And so we're using that paraprofessionals resource to provide that. And this is how much we'll spend this year in the months of May and June for extra support hours for paraprofessionals. You go to next year, we plan to spend 38 million. Now you notice we're spending ESSER 2, a little bit of ESSER 3, and the Extended Learning Opportunities Grant there. And you can see how much we're spending of each of those. And then this should look very similar because it's the exact same things that we did with the CARES Act this year. This should look similar because we're using it from one of the other pieces there. So these are the same exact expenses being paid for again. Then you'll see extended learning. We plan to add additional teachers. We plan to add additional counselors. We're still bargaining how many, but both the Teachers Association and the district have the same goal, which is to bring more staff to support students. And so while the process goes forward, we want the public to hear very clearly, we're going to spend some of these dollars to add more supports. We may differ on the number and the amount within our abilities, but we don't differ in the need. And so you can see the cost. We'll still have to buy a PPE, even though in a week and a half, the governor's going to release some of the restrictions. That doesn't take away the common sense of being safe. Paraprofessionals will continue to have support to extend their hours for next school year. That goes away after next school year, and then we may have to go back to fewer hours if we don't get additional funding. And that takes us to the last year. In 22-23, we'll use 44 million. This chart, again, should look very familiar because it's the same thing you just saw for 3 consecutive years there, because those expenses have not gone away. Again, you'll see a little bit more on the additional teachers and counselors. Our goal and hope is that we won't have to use reserves in 23-24, but I'll talk about that in just a minute. But we do know we need those supports. So I'm going to stop there for a second because that is the one time. What isn't in there is we will have some reserves. We could do everything for one more year after the one-time funds go. Then if the state had not provided additional funding, we might have to make cuts. But that's 3 years away. The state gave a lot of one-time money this year that we haven't even talked about yet. And the anticipation is there's going to be more next year. So we're hoping when they say it's ongoing that we can move stuff away from this concern of being a deficit and just say it's permanent now.
Tony, do you see Mike's question? Were there
Yes.
were there savings by not having to operate schools this year? And did we have to pay first student the full amount for transportation, even though students were not in school? And then I received a question by text around the new funding formula from the governor and how that is going to affect our overall financial picture.
So I'll answer the first thing. We did not save on electricity because there's still power going through. While you don't have every light on, it was not significant savings. While we saved on toilet paper, we paid 5 times as much in masks to get stocked up, and hand sanitizer and other cleaning pieces. Landscape maintenance is actually more expensive when nobody's coming onto the site. There you end up spending more. The state legislature, in their infinite wisdom, would not allow school districts to lay off transportation, food service, or custodial. They required us to keep them all, whether we use them or not, because the state was an employment agency. If we had canceled those contracts, then those are more people that are unemployed. So yes, we did keep first student. Here's the difference though. First student did provide services for us. If we needed to have materials delivered to students' homes, schools could contact first student and they would come, pick them up, and pick up a person and go to the school. The other thing that they would do is they actually transported, as the vaccine came available, they picked up some of our employees that didn't have transportation and took them to their appointment to get vaccinated. So first student worked as a partner. Yes, they weren't transporting every student, but they were making a difference. Landscaping costs more because when you have people walking around on campuses, you don't have the same level of weeds that grow and other things, which become fire hazards. If you ever look at a house that nobody lives at, it starts to become unmanageable very quickly. And so you end up needing to have those services go back out continually to create pieces. And we don't have enough landscapers in the first place. So they were fully employed all the way through as we go. Let's see here. All right, I think I'm caught up. There is one question still in there on unduplicated count. I think that one was clarified by Shakira on each of the pieces. So I think we're cleared up on the question. So I'm just going to do the last little piece about where does the funding go, and then we can come back to any pieces there as well. So in this here, this is our revenue. And oh, there was a question you asked from text. The governor's proposal, there are 2 different new revenues for the district. The 5% COLA, which reduces our structural deficit. It does not get rid of it, but it reduces it. And the second one is that the supplemental grant is being increased from 20% of the base grant to 23%. Those dollars, however, have a very specific purpose. It is to hire teachers and counselors. So what we are proposing for hiring new teachers and counselors, the reason we did that is based on the governor's proposal. Initially, it was to do it in the concentration grant, which we also received. And so now that it's moved to supplemental, it's still the same money for us. So we already accounted for that in adding staff for next year. And that is ongoing money. So that allowed us to go a little bit farther than we would have been able to go otherwise. And that is built into what we're trying to do right now. So hopefully that answered. So if you look at our funding, the state provides us 321 million. Of that, 287 is what we call unrestricted. That comes from the local control funding formula and a little bit in here that's in the lottery piece. The rest is restricted. So we talked about after school, career and technical ed, special ed, 17 million comes from the state for special ed, and then some other state grants. The federal government ongoing provides us 21 million. They this year gave us the 31 in CARES Act, and then we just talked about ESSER and the other things later. So our categoricals like Title I, II, and III, and there's some federal career technical ed is 13 million, special ed is 7. So our special ed revenue for our students is 7 million and 17 million. So we received $24 million for special ed. Just remember that number, that's gonna be important. We also then have what I call the Lewis Freeze accounts, which is some of our local revenues. There are leases and grants that can be used for facilities. The parcel tax we talked about tonight. Notice that the $2+ million goes to the charters, the rest goes to us. MRAD is actually how we pay for maintenance and grounds. If you wondered where it comes from, it's not even general fund, it comes from MRAD. There, which is a maintenance and recreation assessment district. It is a permanent tax that provides us $5.6 million. And it directly goes back to grounds. So here's a way of looking at that money. Your LCFF, local control funding formula, is 233 million. That's our base funds. The supplemental and concentration is 50 million. Then you got the other state and you got the local, very small pieces. So what do we buy with that 291 million? Well, we actually spend 294. So our teachers, pretty important thing, 100 million. Classified, can't run a school without your office manager, without your custodian, your CSOs, essential folks, 35 million. The benefits for those two groups of employees, 62 million. We then spend 24 million to pay for gas, electricity, paper, those very essential things. We're not talking about, oh, we want to, though you have to. We have to provide by law 10 million over to the maintenance account. It says 4% because it's of this expenditure, but it's 3% of the total budget. Has to go over to maintenance. That pays for the plumbers and the electricians and all of the little projects that have to be done. But then notice that special ed costs more. Remember I said we get 24 million? Well, it actually costs 85 million in special ed. So we have to take from this base funding for all students, 61 million has to go over for special ed, because while I'm saying it's unrestricted, it's really a restricted expense. So it's a transfer from the general fund, unrestricted, over to the restricted. One of our budget people basically yelled at me for the way I put this in the slide. He's entirely right, but I just think it makes more sense to understand that this is an expense that the general fund has to pay for, because we are going to fund and support, by law, we have to, but we're not going to leave our special education students left without services in any way. Yes.
I just want to, I always speak up when special education comes up. For folks who don't know, I have 2 sons on the autism spectrum, and this is really an area where our state and our politicians have failed us. Special education has been underfunded traditionally and still is. And what ends up happening is, because the services have to be paid for, it comes out of our base funding. And as you can see, it's a large amount of money that could go for other services if the state was funding special education at the rate at which it needs to be funded. And I believe what Kristen did a presentation, I think each SPED student costs about 3 times what a general education student costs, and the state does not account for that. And exactly, and federal is underfunding as well. So if you all are interested in advocacy, please, this is an area where we really need to do better, because it will benefit all students.
And
So can I
it's
keep
every
it real?
district, it's statewide, it's
Nationwide.
nationwide.
And
Exactly.
so I'm going to keep it really real, because Shakira, you're part of DLCAP for at least a couple more minutes there. One of the biggest criticisms, and I'm going to talk about LCAP in just a minute, is that we really can't use the LCAP for specialized services like we want, because here's what happened. This 61 million has to be spent. So it's taken away from this. So what do you think districts all across California had to do? They had to move this to cover the base. And so what ends up happening is, imagine if that 61 million instantly dropped back over here. And we just got the 61, we got the total amount for special ed to cover special ed. We would immediately pull every person that's funded in LCAP out of LCAP, put them over here, back in the general fund, and LCAP would be completely unspent for extra services for kids. So what's happening is, because we're underfunded here, it's harming the budget here and here, because it's all ultimately the district's piece. So when you talk about advocacy, we're covering the most needy students. We're not going to shortchange them. One, it's law, but two, it's the right thing to do. But it does have a ripple effect to our budget. So that's the realest I can keep it there and say why certain things happen. And I'm not saying that anyone should be happy with what I just said. We're trying to do the reality of what gets done. So I'm going to go a little bit quicker to finish up so we can go back. This is just a bar chart of the same thing. But the reason I did this is I want you to see what we spend our general fund on. So staff, benefits, special ed, you see the 61 million again classified. But then this is the LCAP. And when you look at all those programs, 22 million of it is for certificated staff. That's above and beyond the 100 over here. Another 11 million is for benefits, above and beyond the 62 here. Additional special ed. Oh, wait. So it's not just 17 plus 7 plus 61. There's 6.5 million more in services that come over there. Then you have the services. These are the contracts for direct support to kids, only 5 million. And then you got classified staff. So again, the special ed is a big deal, because 88% of our LCAP is going to people to provide services, and they are providing services, but again, it plays into it. So this shows the restricted side. You can see special ed comes over, the CARES Act, the federal Title I programs, other state programs, and then you can see there's your revenue. Here's what it buys. Bunch of different supplies for students in here, other pieces, certificated salaries, classified, and benefits. So that's what happens on the restricted side. And when you go into the budget, you go, where do I see this? So Regina spent time explaining where are the pieces, and then the other pages detail it even more. But if you want to know how much did we plan to spend on books and supplies, well, initially it was 15 million, then it moved to 17 million at the second interim, but so far we've only spent 5 million of it, because we've been careful not to waste money this year. Services, we're at 65 million because we got all of those CARES Acts, but we've only spent 22 as of March. Or no, actually as of January. So this was as of January 31st. And then you can see we projected to spend the full 65 as you go through. So this is our budget. This is how it changed from June to December once the state finalizes. This is how much we had spent as of January and what we project to spend by the end of the year. So this is the main form, and you can see certificated salaries, classified benefits, all the different pieces that Regina talked about are right
And
there.
those object codes are right there as
Yep.
well. And I just want to mention, when we do our interim, our estimated, it's going to be as of April 30. There was a question earlier in the Q&A that said, when will we know what we spent for this year? That will be the unaudited actuals. That will be in June. That will actually go public sometime in August, September. That's when we'll have an idea, and it'll go to the board on what we've actually spent for the year. So to answer that question, we don't anticipate, as Tony just showed there, that we'll have it all spent, but we'll have more than what we just showed there being spent.
So this is a draft, it's not exact, of the LCAP. So when I explained the 88%, these are all the programs and how they're distributed right now. Again, if we received more special ed money, we would be able to provide more here. Now, what isn't here is the governor has a recommendation for more money for full service community schools. There's a recommendation for some intervention support and some additional after school. We know that it's $1 billion at the state level, but we don't know how much we get. So we haven't put it into the budget yet. Our plan is, as soon as we know, we're going to engage our stakeholders and figure out what to do with it. It can't really go to salary, so it's going to go to support to students. So we're actually going to have an opportunity this summer to do some real work that really matters. It's the first time we've actually been able to do it, so we may have to actually bring the DL cap up early to help spend these one-time monies. So I'm kind of actually excited about that. I'll be presenting that on Wednesday night. So here is our federal funds. So when you ask how much do we get in Title I, there it is. And what are we spending it on? People. So 12 million of the 19 million goes to people. Eddie, guess what? We found you. There's your transition funds right there. Didn't want to leave him out, since he did participate, we have to call out Eddie.
And someone asked, is there any money that has to be returned if not spent?
Yes. And I'm going to stop with the acronyms and unshare. The answer is yes. We receive sometimes some grants, such as a residency grant. If we don't then recruit the right teachers, then it's potential that we have to spend the money back. I've found a couple times where we did have to do that. The other reason we would have to give money back is if we try to spend it for something that's not legal. Many of you may have heard about the FPM. It's the Federal Program Monitoring. They came in last year and they found that some of the things we were spending Title III for were not appropriate. I already had figured that out before they did. And Regina knows, because I came in and I said, you're moving that, you're moving that, you're moving that. And they go, there's nowhere to pay for it. And they go, I don't care. We're going to move it. We're going to figure it out. And we lucked out a little bit. So we did some journaling. But if you try to spend money on things that are not allowable, I'll give a great example. Bond funds. If we use bond funds to pay for salary of a principal, we would have to give that money back when we were audited, because that's illegal. And I wouldn't have a job any longer, and my wife would be very unhappy with me. So we're not going to do that. So that's probably the best answer to that. Let me see what else we have in the chat. Federal is underfunding worse than anyone. Back to Margaret's question about special ed. The federal government gives us 17 million. The state gives us 7, or vice versa. I forgot. I'll have to go back and look at the slide. But we get 24 million out of the 84 million we need. The federal government, however, created a law called Free and Appropriate Public Education, or FAPE in the acronym world. And they said you must provide services, but they did not provide funding for it. President Biden has stated that he believes that the federal government should fully fund education. Now, his definition of fully funding special education is probably not give 7 million, but give 14, but we'll take it. We'll take every penny, but the reality is we would need to see basically 5 times what the federal and state are giving to fully fund it. And this is an area that we need to continue to educate everyone on, because special education students, Shakira understands better than many. I actually have a teaching credential in special education. My master's degree is in special education. My father, before he passed away, is one of the founding pioneers of the vision therapy movement that behavioral optometrists use. And he had great success with students with learning disabilities to be able to accommodate and do better in academic settings. I think that's why I went into education. I believe we have a duty to serve those students and get them all the way through Mr. Johnson's program to where they can be contributing members of society. But I also believe as a nation, we have a duty to fund it. So that was my soapbox moment there. Do we have any other questions? This was a lot of information. I want to thank Trustee Reckler and Shakira for allowing us to even do this tonight. We hope that those were here enjoyed it, and that they'll come back again if we do another, because we'd like to. There's a lot more that we can do and go in depth. I'm going to pass it back to you, Shakira.
I wanted to thank my fellow PAC members. I mean, this really, this wasn't just a DOCAPS effort. It was an ASAT, MDAC, CAC, PLC community effort of people saying, we want to know and understand. And so we appreciate you all being able to answer the call, and hope that, as we said, this is just one of many, and wanting to be able to do, deep dives by our UPP and our individual student groups. We have, questions around, I'm sure SPED parents might want to know more about just SPED funding. Black parents want to know more about funding for African-American students, same for English learners. And I feel like now I can go into the presentation on Wednesday and really follow along. And I have my cheat sheet and my slide deck, and I feel like I can fully participate because I have, and that I can ask good questions by being given this information. And so I hope that this, as I said, just the beginning, and we just appreciate being heard as parents, and being heard, and then there being action taken based on what we said we needed. So we really, really appreciate that. Thank everyone for coming. Great questions, great questions. I cannot say that enough. Things people ask I might not have even thought about. So we really, really appreciate everyone. Tony, thank you so much for, being open, being willing to do this. And I'm holding you and Leslie to your budget ambassadors program, so that when we do this next time, then maybe one of us parents can be part of the presenters. I love being a moderator, but I want to present some slides and sound like I know what I'm talking about around dollars and codes and things like that. So baby steps, but this was a great first time out, and I really, really and hope that we'll have, more folks next time around. So thank you again, and thank everyone for being here with us.
So I just pasted into the chat.
Oh, yes, Leslie
Marin,
has a comment, and yes, go ahead, Tony.
Marin created, I think, an exit survey. I hope it's active.
Yes, it is.
So I just pasted that into the chat right now. For those that were here, we really want to know if we didn't do something well enough, or if there's an area that you want, please tell us. This is recorded. We're going to put it on our website so that people can go back. I don't know if we can put the chat up. Veronica, if you can try to save it, and the Q&A, so that we can try before we close this down. We want everything to be accessible again and again. to folks. So it's paste it in the chat if you can try to enter anything. We would love that. And Trustee Reckler, I know I stepped on you, so I will.
No, you
be
took it.
quiet.
There's going to be an exit survey. Please tell us what you think. There's also, we do run a budget committee meeting. We meet once a month on Fridays. You can find the calendar on the district website. If you just go to the calendar and you look under Fridays, you'll see the budget committee from 3 to 5 o'clock. And we do take relevant topics. I mean, it's super boring, sort of, you know, but I don't get into the math. This is very strategic. I try to keep it strategic. We talk about audits, we talk about budget, we've talked about some trouble we got in Title III. We always have experts come. It's not listening to Dr. Wold. We've had the people from PICMAC come, and really we've had people from the county come, broad range of experts who come and talk to us about school finance. And so you're going to get a very high level. I am not in the numbers on this, and you'll get some understanding. And you also get access to some amazing brain trusts, and you meet the network that supports school districts, and it's quite extensive. And you know, I think it's fascinating. Like, who would have known all these people are out there that support school districts in doing what they do? So it's very complex. Try and make it easy. We actually have a good time. We laugh, and you're invited to join us on that. So the exit survey, and I do commit to roughing out the rest of this over the summer.
And I just want to highlight, we didn't have them all presenting, but there's several staff members that are quietly hiding behind their little faces. But with us tonight is Margarita Romo, who's our internal auditor, soon to be our charter school coordinator. Phyllis Rosen is our risk manager. So everything as it pertains to risk management and that accounting. We have Mary Kitchen, who's one of our coordinators of business services. If you buy it, she was involved. Veronica Vega is my senior administrative assistant, and I'd be dead without her. And then one of the hardest working people over on the facility side is Sanjay Cha. She does all of the financial accounting for our bond. Oh, see, she even popped her head out, so thank you so much. You talk about a behind the scenes job and the reports that she puts out. If you ever want to see what Sanjay does, go to a CBOC meeting and you will see the amount of work. And she even found me today to have me sign for bonds. By the way, we told the board that we were going to save taxpayers 13 million. Guess what? 24. We rocked in the resale today of refinancing some bonds that are older and outstanding. So I'm real excited. And then also Lynn Potter is with us tonight. Lynn is behind the scenes on all of the compliance, all the different reports. She's writing the final LCAP that's going to be posted tomorrow with those pieces. It is an amazing group of folks there. We have both of our translators here, and they're here at everything. I mean, I feel like I'm at every meeting in the world. They're here. Kim Chamberlain, we promote her up. She is the person that makes sure that we have the data. And then Martine Blake is here. When you talk about outreach to our families and our community partners, we couldn't do anything. There was one really important thing I don't know if anyone noticed. I just talked about a huge group of women that are leading this district. This is the future. This is what makes us move. And every one of them is a powerful woman in finance and in math. So when you go home and you talk to your daughters, tell them, I'll hire them. I want them. I want women to be leading us and moving forward, and that there's a pathway for all of you. So all of those folks that were here, and I have several others in the audience that are part of our team as well. I just noticed that Bobby showed up too. Thanks, Bobby. We've got Angelica Lopez, who's one of our accounting technicians, sitting and watching. We've got union members in there. We've got folks from other districts. It's a fantastic group of folks there. And I just really wanted to thank everybody. We had a small but dedicated group that stayed. I think we'll probably try to find another time to do this exact presentation again because I want to get it broader. It's hard to do the last weeks of school. So maybe I'll talk to you, Trustee Reckler and Shakira, about doing a redo of this exact same thing in the summer or after the budget's adopted. Because we want people to be able to come in with great questions and hold us accountable. Don't beat us up, but hold us accountable. Thank you for allowing me to do this, and Regina and team. Let me see if there's anything else in the chat.
Nope. Thank you all so much again for coming, district staff. Thank you all for support. Regina, thank you very much. I feel like this is my first time meeting you, so I have to thank you. The rest of this I know pretty well. And I be remiss, we can't mention community engagement without also thanking Marin. And so he's another guy in Tony. And so there are two of you.
Gustavo's not here tonight, so I could have said 3.
Well, there you go. So hopefully we will be doing this again and, you know, have more folks and more great questions and dialogue. And so we're almost done with this year. We've almost made it a little bit longer, and then we'll be free to move about the cabin and hopefully start getting our lives back to some sense of normalcy. So I'm looking forward to being in community with you folks going forward. Good night.
Good night, all. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.